It's a great pleasure to have you on the podcast, Matt. Our esteemed guest and one of the first ever guests on the Culture Matters podcast. I'm your host, Florian Strolley of Hendricks Health. Why don't we just start with you just telling us a little bit more about your background, where you're from, and how you ended up here in New Zealand.
Well, thanks, Florian. It's a great honor to be one of your first guests on your podcast. Fantastic, thank you. So my background, I'm an emergency medicine specialist by background. I'm from the United States, from the state of Oregon. That's the state north of California. I grew up in a rural town in the eastern part of the state. I always said it was a good place to grow up and leave. I did my undergraduate university training on the east coast of the U.S., then back to Oregon for medical school, and then to the center of the country to St. Louis, Missouri for my specialty training in emergency medicine. My family at that point moved back to Oregon and worked in a small emergency department on a small hospital on the Oregon coast. For about 5 years of that. Had a bad day at work one day and was just feeling restless, and came back and couldn't sleep and started Googling locum opportunities in other parts of the world. And after a bit of reading, I came back to bed at 3 a.m. and my wife asked me if everything was okay. And I told her I wanted to sell the house and the cars and move to New Zealand. So, and then I fell fast asleep because it was a bit of a shock. She then couldn't get back to sleep and was up the rest of the night wondering how one went about such a thing. But that was the start of it then back in 2008.
That's a big jump. I can relate. Obviously, also having made the decision to come to New Zealand in the middle of the night one night back in 2002, and then having to actually prepare for it for two years. And I actually spent a bit of time in Oregon because I was an exchange student in Seattle, Washington for a year in high school in 99, 2000.
Oh, wow.
And we did go down to Portland. So it's beautiful,
Fantastic.
Beautiful part of America.
It is, yeah.
All right, so fast forward, now you've arrived in New Zealand. What were some of your first experiences like? How is it different from how you practice medicine back in the States? Were there some things that were really unexpected for you and maybe some stereotypes that turned out to be true?
The practice of medicine in many ways was really similar, and it quickly sort of showed the universality of us as human beings. The ways that human beings go wrong and get sick is very consistent around the world. Some of the big differences I did notice felt a much more practical, pragmatic way of approaching medicine. I felt very free in New Zealand to do what I thought was the right thing for my patients, as opposed to the U.S., where sort of trained and expected to practice medicine in a very defensive way, ordering lots of tests, whether you need them or not, just so that somebody might not sue you. In New Zealand, it feels very much more like you can practice good medicine rather than legally defensive medicine.
Mm-hmm. Any kind of idiosyncrasies you picked up in the way that people communicated, or that just little things that you might have noticed, or maybe even your wife noticed when you first arrived?
Yeah, no, that was so we when we came the hospital where I still do some work at, which is Whakatane Hospital. In a lot of ways, it was very similar to where I worked, because small hospitals are very similar kind of all around the world in the way they operate. And in New Zealand, the medical staff of the smaller hospitals can be actually quite cosmopolitan. They have to reach out to people from all over the world to staff them. It was in some ways, it was a very international experience, and learning to work not just with. Well, I think at that time in the medical staff of all the SMOs in Whakatane Hospital, of a couple of dozen or more, only one was a Kiwi. Everyone else was American, South African, British, German, from all over. So that was a very international experience, and we were all just sort of coming together as a group to figure out how to take care of people best, little corner of New Zealand. So there's a lot of getting used to just a few little peculiarities of that hospital, and then you have measurement units, different ways of describing injuries and what happened to people. So yeah.
And that's very insightful. Now, you mentioned obviously the makeup of that SMO group, and we now know that about 61% of our current medical workforce is from overseas, is an international medical graduate.
Yep.
There's some really interesting research done by the Medical Council of New Zealand into how long people stay after they've registered to practice here in New Zealand And one of the stats that kind of shocked me a little bit was that 61% leave within 2 years, and the average length of stay is only just 3 years, the average time people spend living in New Zealand. What do you think are some of the drivers why some people choose to stay and why others choose to go and seek greener pastures elsewhere?
I would imagine that those numbers skew in a couple different ways. Certainly some people come with the intention of only coming for a year. It's like, I'm taking a year off from my career to do something different. And they come and they have an experience and they leave. Occasionally a few of those will wish they were staying longer. I've known some people who have come, done that time, gone back home, and then come back years later when they had the opportunity. But those are relatively fewer and far between. It's harder psychologically to make that jump to, I think, actually emigrating to a new country and saying I'm leaving permanently. Even when we came, I had a 1-year locum contract, and sort of our plan was to come for a year, but I'd also wanted to leave that job that I was at. So plan was, if we returned to the U.S., I would look for a job elsewhere and go somewhere else. We didn't have anything to come back to. We sold our house. We sold all of our possessions that couldn't fit in a 10 by 20 foot storage unit. So we didn't have a much sort of physical anchor back to the U.S. After a while, you can kind of sort of tell the people who might stay longer and are sort of fit for it, even if they think they want to stay longer, the ones who don't. And the sort of people who say constantly, like, well, in the U.S. we do it this way, or in the U.K. we do it this way. There are different ways of doing things in New Zealand that accomplish the same goal just fine. They just don't have quite that flexibility to break through and out of some of their comfort zones.
Yeah, that's a very powerful insight, and I guess it's a good strategy that you took, actually, not allowing you a plan B, so that you weren't even tempted. And how about your partner? Did she find it easy to first settle in? Did that help, or maybe did even hinder your integration? Like, how do you see sort of the role of the wider family and how they settle in that sort of equation?
I think in some ways, again, it was easier coming to a place like Whakatane than Auckland or Christchurch, because within that sort of that hospital, whānau was from someplace else. There was sort of inherently understood the importance of sort of outreach and bringing people in and involving the partners and kids in activities. I was lucky that I sort of arrived at the same time as several other people, so we were all kind of the newbies together. And although most of them, I think all of them have left since, but that was sort of an initial group to be a part of. And it gave some of that really important sort of social structure for my wife in particular. When you first move here, you can't have partners generally can't have a work visa, so they don't have a work opportunity. The kids go to school; they're fine. The kids are in school loving it. They go native, running around barefoot in no time. But having some of the interactions with other family members of hospital staff was really helpful for her.
Yeah, I just feel that's such an important part, is to just ensure that the whole family is well integrated, because if there's someone who's unhappy, then that's likely going to drive them in a different direction, right?
Well, I believe some of those stats about people who stay and don't stay in New Zealand, it is often cited, the partner is cited as sort of the main reason. So if we did make efforts in Whakatane with our new staff to reach out and try to engage people's partners and get them engaged in things, just because if we could do that and we could get them to buy a house, then then we had them. So. Absolutely.
So in that vein, what would you say to another clinician that is considering coming to New Zealand? Feel free to speak directly into the camera, like if you would like to.
Well, I won't wouldn't sugarcoat it. It is a big decision. It's a life-changing decision. It has big implications for your family, for your finances, for all sorts of things. But it's a fantastic experience that being in healthcare, that it's really unique to being in healthcare. We are so lucky that our skill set is something that's in global demand, and that we have the opportunity to do it. Whether you emigrate or not, just even the opportunity to work somewhere else and see if you like it is practically unprecedented among other professions. So it's a real benefit to healthcare, whether it's medical, nursing, allied health, and I think it's a shame to not take advantage of it.
Amazing. Now, just coming back, obviously this is a podcast about culture and about culture in the workplace. Matt, have you had an experience where cultural understanding has led to better patient outcomes? Or can you provide an example where maybe even cultural misunderstandings have led to not so ideal outcomes or potentially conflict in the workplace, how it was resolved and what you learned from an experience like that?
You know, when I came as a locum, it was a bit of a fluke as much as anything else that I ended up in Whakatane instead of one of the other half dozen sites that were looking for locum doctors at that time. And I feel very fortunate and lucky that I did end up there, because I think I got right away a much more immersive cultural experience in New Zealand, in particular with the Maori population there, than I would have in many other places in New Zealand. And even with that immersion, though, it took time. I took advantage, and perhaps unfair advantage, and advantage for too long, of the fact that I could just be this big, goofy, smiling American and not be expected to know any better as an American. One of the few places where being an American isn't such a strike against you as perhaps being British or whatnot. But I probably didn't even recognize when I was being culturally inappropriate, because I was able to get away with it for that reason. But just when I started learning the value and the benefit I've got of starting to I don't know Toreo, but I can at least, I'm much better now at pronouncing it than I used to, and pronouncing people's names and place names. I remember very early on asking some little boy who I was seeing for something, just chatting with him and saying, like, "So you're from Opotiki?" And he looks at me with just kind of shyly with big eyes, and he goes, "Opotiki." And I said, "Thank you so much. I know I pronounce things wrong. Thank you for correcting me, because I can't learn unless you do that." And he smiled at me, and just that act then, and I think I saw out of the corner of my eye his mom smile a little bit as well too. But just making those efforts makes such a difference. The other thing that you see in areas like the Eastern Bay of Plenty and the East Cape, though, is the effects of the deprivation in those areas as well too, and the lack of ability to access healthcare, and the fact that people have had very bad experiences in the hospital before, and for better or for worse, even that the hospital is a place you go to when you die. The ability to start to understand that and what some people's lived experience have been, so that you don't have to directly acknowledge that, but acknowledge their fear and their courage of being there, and be able to say, like, yes, you're sick, but you're in the right place, and we're going to take care of you, and we're going to help you get better. I see now how that has made such a big difference, and I try to now take into account that that psychological care, cultural and psychological safety care, as well as the medical care in my practice where I can.
Now, you mentioned that it was quite a diverse makeup in the SMO group at the time. My own background, obviously being German, similar to South African or Dutch, we might prefer quite a direct communication style. We might prefer criticism straight to our face without sugarcoating it so much, which might be a different expectation for someone who comes from maybe India or China. Did you notice any kind of sort of intercultural challenges in terms of collaborating, communicating with that broad group of people there? Are there any kind of insights that you can share?
Americans are certainly not quite up the same spectrum as the Dutch and South Africans as far as the bluntness goes, but certainly will be more confrontational than the New Zealanders at times. That's a tricky one to navigate, but just being aware of those differences off the bat is the first step, and having a little self-awareness about yourself, and a little metacognition about what you're thinking and what they might be thinking, and you just have to slow down. It's some of the same techniques that we have to use in the emergency department when we feel like a patient might be pushing our buttons a little bit. We have to use professionally as well too. You have to teach yourself to step back and think for a moment before you respond, and keep the lines of communication open, and not cut people off. As long as we keep communicating with each other, we usually stumble our way to the right answer eventually. But yes, it certainly can cause some disruption and awkwardness sometimes.
Do you remember any training that you might have had in that regard, or is that not something that was done at the time?
I don't recollect any specific training in that, just as part of coming to the Whakatane initially. It was part of some of the training that I did later, some more specific leadership training, where there's some of that was more we talked more specifically about some of those cultural differences. But no, it wasn't part of the initial welcome to New Zealand part of.
Was there any welcome to New Zealand part?
Oh yeah. Yes, there was. At Whakatane, and again, being Whakatane, we were given a pōwhiri. We were given a sort of a few page, photocopied pamphlet about with a few cultural do's and don'ts. But there is probably more. I don't want to make it sound like somebody wasn't doing their job or anything, but really, it's no substitute from actually then getting the immersion and living in it, and that just takes time.
But you certainly did feel like it was a really warm welcome.
Yes. No, we were very warmly welcomed to Whakatane.
Well, we're already at the last question. Finally, let's take a look into the future. So, Matt, you are part of the clinical leadership team under Lara Hopley for Te Whatuora, and be interested what your view is on the advent of AI in healthcare. Will we increasingly have to navigate not only collaborating with our colleagues from a variety of different backgrounds, but also machines, AI agents? How will that change the workplace of the future?
So another way I feel very lucky to have been able to get involved with clinical informatics, the field of medicine and healthcare, to have the opportunity to take part in this technological change. I'm actually a pretty poor futurologist at predicting things. I hesitate to make any predictions, probably just mostly because I'm scared of being wrong, because the future always surprises us. But there is no doubt that the practice of medicine will be profoundly changed by AI. There's lots of things that I see as a potential progression. I mean, just starting with some of the tools that are available now, that the ambient listening tools that can take over the load of documentation, which is otherwise has become more and more burdensome over time. So being free from that would be a huge advantage. Being able to pick up on multiple bits of information and combine with other information sources that in ways the human brain can't. I mean, we can generally hold 3 or 4 pieces of evidence in our mind or information about something to make a decision, maybe 5 or 6 if we're really smart and we're well rested and well fed and don't have to go to the bathroom, and the machines can obviously hold more and make decisions on more points at once without the biologic distractions. And that will be, I have no idea how that is going to change. I know it will change our practice, but how it does and the way it does, I'm excited to find out, and I'm excited to be working to do that. I expect that working with machines will be in some ways like working with somebody from a different country. We'll have to learn their mannerisms basically, and if they do go wrong, and presumably they will go wrong at least for a while, do they do so in a predictable manner? Can we learn to, just like some of our colleagues or might behave in a particular predictable manner, and we can take that into account when we interact with them. We'll perhaps be doing the same with some of these different agents, and we may even have to learn how different agents behave. This is the way the radiology system AI acts, and this is the way the medicine's AI act, and let's see if we can get them to argue with each other. But I'm just happy to be working in a place where we're starting to build the foundations to make that kind of digitally transformed practice a reality.
From my point of view, having spent a bit of time now at the intersection of culture and also the advent of artificial intelligence in healthcare, I'm personally really excited about the capabilities of these types of tools that you talked about, like the AI documentation scribing tools, combined with large language models to actually unlock cultural literacy. So AI literacy actually unlocks health literacy, for example. It's Dr. Google 2.0 for a lot of people, but if you know how to ask the right questions, it can be surprisingly powerful. And the same goes for culture. If you're struggling with a patient, maybe they're from a specific cultural background, being able to explain to them in their worldview why it is important that they take their medicines can be the difference whether they take that medicine or not. And that can have profound impacts on them and the whole family.
Absolutely.
And not everyone has received that type of training that we talked about, cultural awareness training. But it is really possible today to just ask in a large language model, please explain what the patient needs to do in Te Reo Māori with a Te Ao Māori worldview. And it is surprisingly powerful once you sort of start delving into those use cases. And there are many, many of those.
Well, that's an interesting one too, because we've been telling ourselves for a long time that the machines will help free us up from some of the administrative minutia of healthcare and let us spend more time at a patient bedside, and that's still true. But you're describing something that's quite true as well. The machines will compete for us with us there as well at the bedside. I'm still not worried about my job, at least in my lifetime. But I think you're absolutely right that we don't want to overlook and not take advantage of that possibilities that you're describing. We don't have enough human beings in health, and we probably can't afford to have enough human beings in health to do everything that we need to do. So using AI to help support us in that would be definitely the way to give better healthcare to more people.
People are still really scared. I think the number, we did a search term analysis around AI in healthcare, and the number 3, like top 3 searches were all like, will AI take my job? Are robots going to take over? Pretty much all that kind of variations of the same theme, rather than how do I apply it in my practice and how do I ensure that it integrates neatly into my workflow? Those kinds of questions, they're still very rare, at least on Google. Maybe they're asking ChatGPT, I don't know.
No, I mean, the piece of advice that I've taken on board for myself and that I tell my kids and people, and other people that I run into is that, an AI is not going to take your job, but a human being who uses AI well will take your job. So you need to you need to have those skills to accentuate your own individual abilities.
Well, Dr. Matt Valentine, thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate your insights. It's been hugely valuable. I'm so grateful to you for taking this time, and looking forward to maybe doing it again at another time in the future.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and happy to come back, and best wishes for the ongoing podcast.
Awesome.